Morning, everybody. Just giving everyone a moment for their audio to connect. It looks like everyone's hooked up, so we'll get started. So welcome this morning to Let's Be Realistic, Juggling Creative Child-Led Learning with Classroom Pressures on the second day of this year's Imagine If Digital Conference Series. So this year our conference explores the theme, Imagine If Creativity Gave Us the Freedom to Learn Without Inhibition and to Accept Mistakes as Part of Our Lifelong Discovery. My name's Mel Burgess, for people who haven't met me before, and I'm Programme Manager for Culture Bridge North East. And for people who don't know Culture Bridge, we're part of Arts Council England's national network of bridge organisations, connecting the education and cultural sectors to enable better access to quality arts and cultural education for all children and young people, no matter what their circumstances. And it feels like this is becoming more and more pertinent than ever, particularly over the last year or so in our current climate. But before we get started with today's session, just bear with me because I've got a few housekeeping things to share with you. So we'll just rattle through those and then we'll be able to make a start on the interesting part. You have all received delegate packs before today, and you should have seen our delegate guidelines in there. But just to remind you, we ask you to please just remain muted unless you're speaking. And if you keep your settings on speaker view, that means you can see whoever's presenting full screen rather than everyone in the room, but that's personal preference, so I'll leave that up to you. Can I ask you to just take a couple of minutes to edit your screen name, and you can do that just by hovering over your image and clicking on the three dots. If you could make sure that that shows your name and your organisation or your school, that's really helpful for us, particularly when we are looking at breakout rooms and making sure we've got a good mix of different sectors in a breakout room. And if you can add your pronouns as well, then that's really helpful in those group discussions too. So thank you for that. Just while you're doing that, just to introduce you to our digital stage manager, Danny, who's here with us today for any technical queries. So if you're having any issues at all, or any sound issues or connection issues, you can message her in the chat and she'll help you out with that. If you have a question about anything as we go along, you can use the chat box for that, and then Dan can either pick it up as we go, or we'll do a bit of a Q&A at the end and we can scoop up anything that hasn't already been covered. So please do use the chat for that. And finally, we do have subtitles available for this session. So if you'd like to see the closed captions, if you just click on live transcript at the bottom of your screen where it says CC and select show subtitle, and that will put live subtitles up for you. Please bear with them because they are done automatically, so sometimes we get some interesting translations, but they're roughly there or thereabouts. We did gather consent in your booking forms, but just a reminder that we are recording this session and it will be used as a digital resource afterwards on our website, so just to make you aware of that. And please do feel free to share any experiences or thoughts from today. If you're on Twitter, that would be great. I'm going to put our Twitter handle and the conference hashtag in the chat, but we are at CultureBridgeNE and the hashtag is ImagineIf21. So that would be great to have you join the conversation there. So now it's time for me to introduce our speaker for this morning, Dan Turner. So Dan has been a teacher for 10 years within a range of different settings, and he's currently teaching Year 6 at Cragside Primary School in Newcastle and leading the English team as part of their school development plan. So we're delighted to have him here with us to share his expertise and experiences this morning. So I'm going to stop now and I'm going to hand over to Dan. Thank you.
Hello, thanks Mel. It's great to see everyone and thank you for coming along. I'm hoping this will be a really useful experience for everyone. Aiming for this session to not just be me talking and then acting as though I'm Mr. Miyagi or anything like that. Hoping it'll be a case of everyone being able to get involved, share ideas, talk things through. I think anyone who's been teaching long term knows that the best practice comes from sharing stuff as professionals and things. I'm just going to share my screen now, so hopefully you'll be able to see a PowerPoint in just a sec. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see that. Okay, so this session is looking at that practical side of creative child-led learning. Mel has done a fantastic job of introducing me there, but just in case, a little bit more about me. Teacher now 11 years. It was last year when I wrote about the 10-year thing. Range of different things. Currently leading on English. I've been science coordinator and PE coordinator in my time. I have 2 young kids at home, so I have no social life or anything like that. Certainly appreciate outside factors and stresses on the job, etc., etc. Aims of the session. So today we're going to think about those common pressures that prevent teachers from being able to utilise the child-led and creative approach in lessons. I'm going to use Cragside as kind of like a case study. So I'm going to show you what the work we first did with Culture Bridge pre-COVID and how we've kind of developed things since. I'm going to particularly talk about things which have worked and things which haven't. And like I say, it would be really great if everyone could share those ideas and things. It's really important to note as well that things that work for one school might not work for another, so it would be really good to be able to get ideas about different cohorts. You know, we know every cohort is different, we know every school is different. So yeah, this isn't me saying that this is the way to do it by any means. This is just some of the kind of tips and the practical things that we've picked up over the last couple of years. Okay, so
Dan, can I just jump in super quickly? Sorry to interrupt. We're getting a few black boxes on your slide. Would you mind stop sharing and resharing again to see if that fixes it?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. It's looking like they still might be there. Yeah, a couple of them went away when you were on your slides before.
Do you want us to try just sharing the screen rather than PowerPoint?
Yeah, that would be fab. Thank you, Dan. And if not, I can share the slides for you.
How about that? Does that work?
They're still there, which is a little bit odd. I'm going to stop your sharing and share.
I've changed a few things since I sent you those. Can I just try again with mine, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry about this, everyone. How about now?
They're still there. I am just going to try and hide the subtitles. Dan, could you stop sharing and try resharing again?
Of course.
We'll get there.
Fingers crossed.
There's still a couple at the top. I'm not sure that it will actually impact.
Have they gone now?
Yes, that looks good, Dan.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so very aware that not everyone in the session is a primary school teacher or a secondary school teacher. So I just thought I would recap for the people who aren't what the role of a teacher is. You know, the role of the teacher, as kind of laid down by the government, would be to meet all statutory objectives and ideally non-statutory objectives within the national curriculum. It always amazes me when I work with outside agencies and, you know, people who come in to work with children, how many people don't actually look at the national curriculum and how many people aren't aware of it. So for those of you who aren't, the curriculum varies different from each subject. In some cases, it's almost a little rough guide. So I've got the design and technology programs of study on the screen there, and that's all of the statutory objectives across Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So again, you know, schools have a lot of freedom there in terms of the year groups within Key Stage 1, Year 1 and 2, where those objectives would be and how you would meet them. Likewise, you know, Key Stage 2, that's actually going across 4 years. So again, schools have got a lot of freedom in terms of how they develop those objectives. For something like English and maths, there's a lot more structure to that. So you can see here is the Year 1
Millie Maloney joined the meeting.
And again, a lot more guidance there, a lot more objectives to fit in. There's benefits and downsides to both of those. So the benefit of having that, you know, rough structure is that you can really make everything bespoke for your own school. Whereas having like when you look at the English objectives, there's so much there to fit in, and you know, you're almost have your hands tied in terms of where things go and how they go. Here are some other things that I think would come up for the role of a teacher. So you have working with families, we are providing those extracurricular activities for children. We are pastoral, that, you know, we are a solid relationship and role model for those children. We have cultural capital, which is working with families to ensure that you expose communities and families to as much culture as you possibly can. safeguarding, ensuring that children are safe and looked after and cared for in the classroom and at home. We have homework, we have Ofsted, of course, exam pressures. So as a primary school teacher, these are the things that pop up on our list. We've got phonics tests in year 1 and 2. We've got Key Stage 1 SATs in year 2. We've got a times table check in year 4. And we've got I've said Key Stage 2 check, I should say Key Stage 2 SAT at the end of year 6. Some of the stuff that I'm going to be working on from this gentleman, Dr. Tristan Stobie. I don't know if anyone's read any of his work or anything. He works for the Cambridge Assessment International Education, and he is fantastic. In my role as a leader, I've used so many of his ideas and tips in advance. And at the end of the session, I'll put my email in the chat and I can send across some of the stuff that we found really, really useful.
Millie Maloney joined the meeting.
I thought this was really valuable little quote though. Teaching should be a rewarding profession where teachers are empowered and supported to be the best creative professionals that they can be. The overwhelming body of research finds that the most important factor in improving student outcomes is good teaching. Therefore, helping teachers become better is the most important responsibility we have as leaders. It's the best way to help learners fulfill their potential. And again, what I like about Tristan is he gives examples and practical advice of how these things can be done. So I'm hoping to share some of them in a little bit. Now, it is really important to be able to talk honestly and freely. So I always cringe at this sort of thing. I always hate it when I'm in a meeting and we'll have to do this kind of icebreaker stuff. But I thought just for 5 minutes, so you could get to know the people who you'll be in a room with and the kind of people that you'll be talking to. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, doing the classic, your name and what your profession is, how long you've been doing it, that kind of thing. And then if you have time, have a little chat. Which celebrity would you like to have dinner with and why? I'll not ask you at the end which one you've chosen or why, but please feel free to have a good chat. You're not being recorded in the breakout room, so please just get to know each other. Could we go into the breakout rooms there, Danny?
Yes, so I'm going to open the breakout room, so everyone should get a pop-up on their screen. If you can just click OK, you'll move automatically in your breakout rooms, and then we'll let you know when we're ready for you to come back. So I'm just going to open them all now.
All right, thanks everyone. Like I said, I'm not going to ask you to share what you talked about in those rooms in terms of the celebrity things, but hopefully you've got a grip on the kind of people that you'll be talking to and know where everyone's coming from. I'd like to share with you what Cragside worked on a couple of years ago. Again, I know everyone kind of feels in the same boat. I'm sure, the last couple of years have kind of blurred. So I was quite shocked when I realized just how long ago we actually did this. But we did some work with Culture Bridge around Shakespeare's The Tempest. So this was linked with the Shakespeare in Schools Foundation. So we didn't have a choice on doing The Tempest. We were told that we were doing that. And Lisa, the assistant head of Cragside, and I sat down and thought, well, how can we really do this in that child-led way? Make sure that everything comes back to inquiry, make sure everything comes back to creativity. So we knew we had to do The Tempest. And what we aimed to do, apart from for math, was to link geography, music, art, science, and English where possible. And we just decided to really go for it, let the children choose the theme of the play. So we let them choose the setting, we let them choose what the characters were going to wear, we let them choose the music, and kind of see where that went to. I'll be honest, I had a few sleepless nights when it eventually turned out the children chose a post-apocalyptic wasteland for the area that the Tempest was going to be in. So it was literally, I don't know how aware people are of the Tempest, but it's all on an island and there's lots of water and, lots of nature and stuff. So they literally went down the furthest route from the text that they could. And, I was pretty scared originally, but after a little bit of thinking, getting our head around it, Lisa and I, when we were doing the plan, it was actually really invigorating. It was actually something that we would have never really thought of doing ourselves. And because the children had went with it, we were given that kind of permission to kind of go with it and see where we were going. I'd just like to share something from my head teacher. She's been head teacher at Cragside the last couple of years. Becky Jackson, she was one of the ones that really gave us permission to just, really go with where the kids want to go with it. I'm hoping this will work out all right if I share my screen. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see that.
With a variety of professionals like Rob and working with Northern Stage, that will definitely help us. I'm aware that we then need to maybe share our learning with other schools, so that freeing up Lisa, for example, the cultural lead, to go and work with other schools who may be thinking about a project like this and just support them like that, I think would be a really valuable next step. What I want is for creativity to be embedded across the school and through every school day, so that it is, and I think we're moving really well along that direction already. So we don't just see creativity as I've said before, in an arts lesson, in an art lesson, or in music. We don't just think, oh, this is where you can be creative. We recognise that creativity can take place in all lessons and all subjects, and that by investing in creative thinking with all children, that when they leave us, Cragside children are known for their ability to think in divergent ways, to work well with others, to think about other people's ideas, to accept and respect the ideas of others, and that we'll be producing not just great artists or actors or musicians, but also data scientists, engineers, that all of these things are part of creativity. It's not just, and I don't mean just, an artist or an actor who's creative, that we can see that importance in all sorts of subjects and all sorts.
So I'm aware we're very lucky to have Becky and have that kind of approach, but that's certainly something that we've really worked on in the last 3 years, is putting that creativity and that inquiry at the heart of everything. And we've had some successes and we've had some things that haven't quite worked out for us. And those are the things I'm going to share as we go. So I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint now. I hope everyone can see that. So some of the things that we thought really worked when we reflected on the Culture Bridge project at the end of it, it culminated in doing a performance on the stage. Children were involved with creating the costumes, composing music. They were on a stage, they worked with the technology, etc., etc. We also put it into lessons. So our English lessons were all based around the Tempest. Our geography lessons, even science and stuff, we all linked to islands. So our science was classifying animals, so we made it about animals that might be on the island, etc., etc. The majority of children really loved it. And we really saw the evidence of how much retention there was. It was something when we did pupil voice later on that all children kind of remembered. Even the children who may not have had a starring role really got a lot out of it. We made sure that all children who wanted to be had a role on the stage. So it could be as part of an ensemble or as part of the dance music. And children who really did not want to be on the stage, they all made sure that they had a role in terms of doing stuff backstage and things. We found as teachers, like I say, being put out of our comfort zone was a real benefit. So provide opportunities to look at things in a fresh way. I would have never thought of doing a post-apocalyptic Tempest, and having to approach it that way just kind of pushed what we would have done, rather than just use old resources or things that were quite comfortable being in the past. It put us out of our comfort zone, and I think it just made everything that little bit more exciting. It also provided opportunities for learners to be exposed to lots of different real world opportunities. So we had people from the backstage at the People's Theatre and at the Northern Stage come and talk to the children. We had a music specialist come in and work on GarageBand and things like that. And children were allowed to learn through mistakes. So lots of costumes went wrong, lots of the music went wrong. We had to decide what mistakes we made and how we could improve on them. And for me, one of the most valuable things was that children saw practical application for their learning. Stuff like drama and music sometimes can just feel a little bit discreet in lessons, particularly if the teacher teaching it isn't very comfortable. So I'm not particularly talented at music. It's something that really puts me out of my comfort zone, and yet I was really able to approach it as, you can see why we're doing this. This is going to be on stage. People make lots of money through doing this, etc., etc. Then there came the things that we needed to develop further. So one of the main things is that we just ran over time, and then our next unit suffered as a result. So we ended up taking, I think it was about a week and a half of the new half term, which obviously is not ideal. With the best will in the world, not every child got to experience every aspect of the production. And particularly with a Shakespeare play, Prospero was a big role. Lots of the children wanted to be Prospero, and not everyone everyone could be, only one child could be. I felt as a teacher as well, some of the objectives from the curriculum that would usually cover just kind of got missed off because we were focused on other things. And then others were linked quite tortuously. I don't even know if that's a word, but I put it on the PowerPoint. What I mean by that is that we link science, as I said, to the island and stuff like that. And I felt like sometimes we were just kind of doing that for the sake of doing it. It was, I don't know how much the kids would have got out of that. I just felt like I was putting the Tempest on the top of a worksheet sometimes. Obviously, the planning and the resourcing was really extensive and involved a lot of teacher and LSA time. And then there was a lot of specific skills required. Now, again, in some ways, this was a benefit. It made us reach out to the community. It made us reach out to people we might not normally think about reaching out to. But, you know, I was certainly running around. One lesson would be costume making, one would be composing, one would be working with computers. Excuse me. There's obviously a lot of specific skills there, and I don't know how comfortable, you know, if you're an NQT or early career teachers, I should say now, that might be a real bonus, something to worry about. So again, we're going to jump out into breakout rooms. I know that this isn't anything new. I know lots of schools use things like this, things like the mantle of the expert, etc., etc. So I was just wondering if you'd seen this kind of approach or something similar to it before. If you have any benefits that I've missed off, would you mind having a little chat with the people in your rooms and maybe sharing them afterwards, if you don't mind? And were there any other disadvantages, any other things that, you know, let's be really honest here, because things that affect schools, we might be able to come up with some tips and some strategies around those. Okay, so Danny, if you wouldn't mind putting us back in breakout rooms, please. All right, is anyone brave enough to share where they've seen things like this before and things that you kind of talked about? Yes, Judy. Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Hi there. So we had really interesting discussion in our breakout room. We ran out of time. There wasn't enough time. But we had some contributions from Gosforth, South Gosforth First School, talking about how they adopted the mantle of the experts, and jump in if I've got this wrong, where children are leading activities. But what that flagged was it does require a lot of planning, a lot of resourcing, but the positives are that children get an awful lot from it. And then there's lots of drama work that support that, and that sort of comes from the children. There's the challenge of including all curriculum objectives, and that sometimes can be a bit tenuous. And then Central Walker were reflecting on how they've kind of done topic-based work, and they've kind of linked in the curriculum as broadly as possible. So some lovely examples, thinking about using the Lion King and researching animals linked to sort of an African topic, and then talking about an all about me child-led project, where actually that really engaged children with their local area and opened up fantastic opportunities for those young people. And then before we ran out of time, Tees Valley Museums were describing some excellent resources that they have, which is about bringing museums into the classroom and how to create an exhibition and the kind of benefits of having that, and how that also has community-facing impacts that invites other people into those classrooms and spaces as well. So that wider dissemination. Is that everything, everyone? Have I covered that?
Thank you, Judy.
Sorry, can I just throw in, because Judy, as she said, we ran out of time, but what she threw into the very end of our discussion, which we didn't get to discuss, but was that, you know, what we're really talking about in terms of giving children that agency to shape their own learning, how we're really talking about not just how difficult that is in terms of teacher time and so on, but also that there's a genuine power sharing that's going on, and when they suggest things that are difficult, you know, and aren't going the way we would automatically go, you know, how that feels, you know, how do we deal with that? But also that's probably like the richest ground that there is. So we didn't get to discuss that much, but it was a really good thought that she threw in.
Thank you. Thanks for those contributions. I did ask for the session to be 5 hours long, but the Culture Bridge wouldn't let me. everything that we're talking about is so useful. And as we said at the start, I'm going to share my email at the end, and hopefully this will be the start of like a partnership. We can keep these ideas going and working alongside each other. Also, Judy, thank you so much. Tortuous. I used tortuous before. Tenuous is so much better. So I'm going to go back and change that slide before I send it out. Thank you. I'm going to jump back onto screen share now. But again, hopefully you'll all be able to see it. We think we might have solved the black box problem. So fingers crossed. Okay, so here are some, sorry about the breakout room thing there. Here are some of the common things that certainly we thought about Cragside, and some of the things I kind of expected would come up. So there's that lack of time in a day. If you do this approach across all subjects, that means that there's going to be lots of changes at once, and that can become very, very stressful for staff. Curriculum objectives start being shuffled. There's then the risk of objectives being missed. There's behavior management. If you're, as Joe kind of mentioned there, that kind of scariness of emboldening and letting the children kind of run things and go with things, that can also then mean that you can kind of feel like you've lost a little bit of control. And again, some children might end up not behaving in the way that you might anticipate or expect. Staff confidence is huge. Certainly around, as I've already mentioned, music is an area that I'm a little bit scared of, and I'm always being pushed out of my comfort zone by my partner teacher because she's amazing with music. Juggling then, the exam pressures is something that we have to be realistic about, particularly secondary colleagues, and in primary, as I've already mentioned, we have these exams and we have to make sure that those are there. One of the things we found as well was that SEN provision, and obviously the bracket, if you're not aware, SEN, special educational needs, that is such a huge thing. Again, we could talk for about 4 hours just on that bit alone. It's huge, and there is no one size fits all for that, because every child has different needs and different experiences that you have to provide. And then finally, as a teacher, evidencing, it can be a little bit scary if you've spent a whole afternoon doing something and you don't have a nice little worksheet at the end of it for the children to do. How do you kind of prove that you've done it if you're expecting to be inspected soon? That could be a real pressure. And even if you're not, if you're not evidencing it in terms of written work, how are you then seeing how every single child's progressing and getting on in the class? Now that we've looked at some of those things, I just wanted to share why Cragside really keeps pushing this model, and why Becky really promotes it through staff. Well, I will when the screen moves. Little quote from Benjamin Franklin: "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn." And I think that's really true. I'm not going to read all these things. As we've said, we'll share the slides at the end. One of the things that I found really interesting when I first was doing this, when I was science lead, is the Ofsted push on this creative approach. And I kept saying this to staff, is that we've got this in writing from Ofsted that they want us to be able to do this. So a little bit just there about the science is, Ofsted have said uninspiring teaching was one reason pupils give to inspectors to explain why they did not wish to continue studying science. And never was not seeing the purpose of what they were studying other than to collect examination grades. I would argue that both of those things are the same. I'd say that if you're not teaching the kids the purpose behind why they're doing things and why these things might be useful, then that is uninspiring. I know as a kid, I remember sitting in lots of lessons thinking, what's the reason for this? What's the point for this? And it's only as an adult I look back, I think, I wish I'd listened more. Inspectors, again, from the one at the bottom, this is written by Ofsted. Inspectors found that the term creativity was subject to a variety of interpretations and applications. Teachers were seen to promote creative learning most purposely and effectively when encouraging pupils to question and challenge, make connections and see relationships, speculate, keep options open while pursuing a line of inquiry, and reflect critically on ideas, actions and results. So when you see it written down like that, obviously it's easy peasy. But that's the kind of thing that we're really putting at the heart of things, and that's the kind of reasons why. This is something that I always refer back to, both as science and English lead, is evidence for the rates of retention. So knowledge and comprehension at the bottom there, you can see that's evidence of children will not retain things just by reciting it or listing a fact once or twice, or even just summarizing and putting ideas into our words. That rate of retention is quite low. Instead, you have the word synthesis and evaluation at the top, letting children create, invent and compose their own ideas, almost teaching each other. is by far the best way to ensure that children can kind of work together and retain information long term. That then obviously creates an issue for what we did next. So if that was the approach that we were going to look at, the thing that we felt we needed was a clearer focus on those curriculum objectives for each subject. So with the Tempest grid as it was, rather than one large project, which we still will do from time to time or might do once a year, we're focused on improving retention and utilizing creative and inquiry-based lessons through looking at smaller objectives and maybe linking a couple of objectives up at once. We made sure that our models encourage staff to recap over previous learning, and that's not seen as a bad thing. We don't just keep plowing through and pushing fact after fact after fact, because again, if they're not retaining the stuff that you taught 2 weeks ago, there's no point moving on. We'll have to keep coming back to things. That needed a really clear curriculum model. Lessons and units to have opportunities for hands-on experience, children to make mistakes, and really, really importantly in English and science in particular. Well, sorry, not in English and science. In English and science, that's the thing that I lead with my teams, but across the school, what is the purpose for learning this? Why are we doing it? So at Cragside, this ended up really relying on the middle leaders to have a clear vision for the subject and how this should look. So we asked middle leaders to really just go back to the drawing board and really just think carefully about what areas would be prioritised and why. Staff then roadmap their curriculums, and we're kept encouraging to boil it down even further, like boil it down to the essential points. What are children learning on their journeys across school? So in foundational subjects, we did on one page across the whole school the journey that a child would go on from early years to year 7 in the skills that they would learn in each year group. And then for maths and English, we looked at our midterm plans again and boiled down everything that staff would be looking at every half term and how we would do that. So on the right there, you can see an example of one of our midterm plans. You can see it really is a working document. I haven't really spruced it up or made it look really particularly pretty or anything. Instead, it's there for staff to keep referring to throughout the half term. Again, purpose is put front and center there. You can see what the point of doing these things are and how children will learn. We've got the links for learning at the bottom, so new staff members will kind of know what year groups children have previously used this kind of stuff in and what year groups will be using it in the future. For me, it's so important that this is a safety net for staff, and I know that sounds really cheesy. I just keep stressing that in every staff meeting. This is a safety net. This is the bare minimum. This is what you build on. So this is there to kind of help staff keep themselves right and help staff make sure that they're ticking every single box in the curriculum. You're not having to go through and tick everything off yourself. You know what's there, and then from that you then build your creative and exciting lessons, and we work together with your middle leader, the subject leader, on that and how you would do that effectively. We're finding that that's really useful, particularly with new staff members. We've got a couple of early career teachers have come in, and it just means that not only are they saying what they need to do in their year group, they're saying what to do across, the same way their learning will go. They'll see where their learning would have come from. Within that, though, like I say, that is that safety net model, because again, that the risk of that is that we are then moving back to being prescriptive. So, we really encourage staff to then build from these. This is the basics. These are the objectives from that. How can you make it creative and exciting and engaging? So a couple of examples of things that I've seen that I liked. In science, we've moved to really focusing on the working scientifically strand, and that's built in across each subject. We encourage teachers to not stress if mistakes are made. Instead, mistakes are a perfectly valid area of science, and they're really important that you think about it. It's involved CPD and support with planning for staff, but some already we're seeing little things like staff have linked Anglo-Saxon topics with materials. So which material would be the best to make a hut, which would be the best to make a boat, links with some of the year 5 objectives, things like classification. And we've been doing that in year 6. We've linked it to our geography topic of mountains and thinking about how these animals would exist in there. We can then from that reach out to outside agencies, the Tyne and Wear Museum Foundation, things like that, and see what kind of help they can give with that. But because we have that solid structure and understanding of what those objectives are, we can then springboard off that ourselves. Another example, so we've got for English, core text is running on the roof of the world. that links with our geography topic, which is mountains. The book focuses on Tibet and China, and children could then think about protest songs. So music, they used their own protest areas and made their own protest songs for that. However, science is evolution. We weren't going to just tortuously link that to the book. I've used that word tortuous again. And we weren't just going to tenuously link that to the book. There's no point. So instead, we taught that discreetly, and then instead we linked art with science. So we've done observational drawings of fossils and things. These are some things, again, I'll not dwell on. These are just little areas that we've picked up working with the NEET schools. Once you've got all that, that sounds great, but that took ages to do. Obviously, we had to then give staff a long time. So for foundation subjects, it was a year just focusing on geography and history and science. And then we're going to then do the same thing with other subjects such as PE, music and art. But again, that's across a big time frame. English and maths, obviously, you don't have that kind of time to mess around with. So I, as English lead, got a lot of time out of class to kind of work on that and make sure those things were ready. And then going back to Tristan at the start, this is kind of what we use at Cragside. And I'm not going to read everything there to you, but these are like his kind of things for creating a positive learning environment. So you've got understanding the content, creating a supportive environment, maximizing the opportunity to learn. And then he's got activating hard thinking, which again, I would say is more of giving children that chance to retain things. Going back to that slide here, ensuring that every lesson, or most lessons, obviously realistically, you're not going to be able to do that in every lesson, but most lessons have at least an element where children are allowed to evaluate, where children are allowed to be creative and lead through that inquiry. So I feel by having those there as a safety net, I know I keep coming back to that, it kind of allows staff to then go on those tangents with children. It allows staff to let children, inquire, rather than having one huge project that, you kind of have to, with the Tempest, we felt like we were just rolling along with it. Instead, we have lots more smaller opportunities for children to learn. I can see there's a hand raised, 2 ticks.
Yeah, Dan, it's me. Could I just ask a question at this point, if that's okay?
Yeah, of course.
For Education Durham, and we do a lot of support for, I work with a lot of sort of middle leaders and in terms of looking at curriculum development. And my background's in the arts, I'm totally for creativity across the curriculum. Something we find is that when some schools take a similar approach to the one you've taken there, and I can see how well sort of planned out it is, that individual subject leaders then struggle to articulate how their subject sort of builds that knowledge and understanding over time, particularly when it's topic based. And so actually getting children to know more and remember more, to use Ofsted's words, it's difficult to then help children to see that journey through a subject. So you've done a lot of thinking and work with your staff around this. So could you manage to make sure you have that journey through a subject as well as embedding that creativity?
Yeah. What we do is, as a curriculum team, we meet regularly and talk this through. So we have our assistant head is head of the curriculum team, and she has, subject leaders with her. And then I'm the English lead. We have a separate maths lead. We all come together to make sure that that's the case. As you've said, that journey through each individual subject, that's kind of the roadmap. So that's where we started, was what's really key to you just on your subject, just on your own. Yeah. And again, across the year, I think that took a full term almost to just really boil that down and think about what really mattered. How did you want your subject to look? So again, we've done that with history, geography, science. With those 3 subjects, what came up was focusing much more on skills and, the working scientifically strong, being able to look at bias, et cetera, et cetera. And history, geography was, being able to use geographical skills. And then once we boiled that roadmaps down, then we thought about, well, how can we link things? How can we give these opportunities? So yeah, I know I keep coming back to that safety net idea, but what we found is as long as staff know exactly what's expected, then they can start trying to branch out and put things together. I hope that's kind of answered your question, because it's still a work in progress for us. And what we're doing next is, as we're doing the kind of similar approach to history, geography and science as we're going to do with PE, music and art this year. So maybe once we've got the other 3, and we might find it a little bit harder to juggle getting everything in. But instead what it kind of is we're really trying to empower those middle leaders to think, well, this is your vision for your subject, make sure staff are doing that, and then each individual staff member is the person who can, you know, link them together and be as creative as they choose to be, as long as they're ticking off that vision and object. I hope that's all right. I feel like I'm throwing around a lot of buzzwords, but I hope that's all right.
No, that does answer my question. I think what you've said there, it's about starting with the subject, making sure your subject leads are really confident in their subject matter materials, and then looking for the links from that, as opposed to starting with the topics and working backwards, which I think is where sometimes there's the issue. So no, that's really, really interesting and helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, that's certainly one of the things we felt with the Tempest, is that we were just kind of putting things in that we felt had a vague link, and then things were getting missed off and stuff. So no, the core of it is how should every subject look, definitely. And we've kind of moved away from doing topic lessons. Each subject has its own individual lesson now as a result of that. So we even have like music books which follow the kids up from reception, etc., etc. So yeah, thank you, Sarah. Also, just again, I think it was Kate. Yeah, I'm happy to share these slides. All of the stuff on here is on our Cragside website as well. You know, it's shared with parents. So we really try to make sure that everything we do isn't educational speak. It's able to be communicated with teachers, parents, governors. I know as a you know, I'm a dad myself, and sometimes you just get loads and loads of paperwork based around what your kids are doing, and you never read it realistically. So we try to really keep stuff approachable and able to be viewed. I'll just jump back to the screen share, but we're about to go into breakout rooms again in just a minute, because I know I've been talking a lot and you're probably fed up with my Cheryl Cole style accent, so it'll be 2 more minutes. So yeah, so this is kind of what we were building on, trying to create this environment from that. And then realistically, as I've mentioned, with my English midterm plans, and also as you can see with that roadmap, it's got the 2019 to 2020 on the top of it. This will be constantly reviewed as well, reviewed with, if there's a new subject lead comes in, obviously they might want to put a different spin on things or put things in a slightly different order. If there is something to respond to in the world. So in last year, for instance, in year 6, one of our topics was pandemics, but it was all based around the Spanish flu, and we thought, well, let's not miss out on an opportunity here. And we talked about all the things that the kids were currently living through, etc., etc. So again, you know, it's mixing this. This is from the ground. This is kind of the basics of what every child needs to do. This is the vision for the subject, and then you as a teacher are empowered to bring that in. That's also involved, you know, really working with staff in terms of collaboration with other schools and within school itself. So I'll help with English planning, but also, as you know, I'm in charge of a team. So sometimes different people in the team will just go and help with that planning, because everyone has these different kinds of ideas and can bring different things to it. Okay, so in terms of the breakout rooms, what I'm really keen for you to have at the end of this session, I'm aware I've talked quite a lot, and again, we were very quick in that last breakout room, so we'll give you a lot longer this time. Have a little chat over the stuff that we've talked about, first of all. Does it ring true to your school and your experiences? Is there any things that I've missed out? And then let's try and think of some realistic tips that we can use together, so everyone has something that they can take away, regardless of whether you're a teacher or an outside agency. I don't know if I've got any SLT members here or middle leaders here, but some kind of things that you can go away from this session thinking, right, even though I had to listen to Dan Turner yabbering on for an hour, I feel like I've got this that I can take to school or take to the office or whatever. So some of the things that we really thought about was, can we streamline planning with this in mind? Can we streamline assessment? How does that look? In terms of opportunities for outside agencies, what can we do now that we know how important each of these objectives are and how tight time is? What can we do there? And even just role of leaders in school, etc., etc. So Danny, if we could jump into the breakout rooms, if maybe 10 minutes, maybe a bit longer, seeing how those conversations go. And then again, if we could have a brave soul like Judy or Joe to come in at the end and talk about some of these ideas and tips, because if you've got an idea or a tip, I guarantee if there's nearly 15 people there or whatever, someone else will find it useful as well. Thank you. Okay, I hope everyone had a bit more time there and was able to talk things through a little bit more clearly. Would anyone like to share any of the things that came out of your conversations? Is anyone brave enough?
We don't mind sharing from our room, Dan.
Oh, thanks, Sarah.
No problem. So we had a really good conversation. I think what was really nice was all of our different experiences in terms of how we can work together in sort of partnership going forward. I think if I summarise, there's an element of sharing good practice like today to hear and be able to reflect on what is working in other schools, both from the school's perspective, but also from those arts organisations' perspectives as well. And with that, it's about building those relationships, but also building in time to plan. And Sue gave a lovely example of actually how the work that the Forge are doing is very much about supporting schools around the CPD need, as opposed to sort of almost helicoptering an artist in to do a contract or to do the work, and then that's the end. It's about that sort of longer relationship over time. We were talking, and Mel in particular was talking about looking at how we can allow children that creative freedom, obviously within, we have to work within the, I'm going to say confines for want of a better word, but within the boundaries of the national curriculum in all of our subjects. But it's about where we can give children the element of choice, allowing them to take creative risks, again, within sort of the framework, but also where we can, as you talked about earlier, Dan, it's about that where we can sort of make links between subjects to help children to understand them on a different level, where it's possible rather than those sort of tenuous links. Was there anything else? Sorry, Lucy, Sue, Mel. I feel like I've missed something. No, I don't think so. Thanks, Sue. Thumbs up.
Thanks, Sarah. All really useful and valuable points there. Has anyone else got anything that you talked about in one of the other breakout rooms that you wouldn't mind sharing? No. Okay. I will just jump back on sharing my screen then. 2 ticks. Okay. So I did ask to think about like realistic tips and things, and what I thought about, well, if I had to really think about what we've been doing for the last 3 years, what would be my advice, for want of a better word? What kind of things would I advise if someone was to ask? So some of the things that I would say are, it comes back to that culture in school, and that can be tricky depending on your SLT or things that are going on in your school. Certainly there's sometimes external pressures and things, but again, that culture where staff are given time, things are embedded in properly and given time to work, that awareness that just because something hasn't worked doesn't mean it's a disaster. It means that you've learned from it and how you can move on from that and where you go from there. Again, we're very lucky at Cragside. Becky just gives that time out as long as you are really clear on what that time is and your time frame that you're working within. That's always fine. So want to use, as I keep going back to, our planning is a safety net. It's there for staff to be reassured that they are ticking all the objectives, and if someone gets missed out, then they can make sure that they come back to it or use it in another lesson. And instead we try and really use it as a springboard for projects, passions, things that people are really, really interested in. And then one of the things that you kind of touched on there, Sarah, just before that, utilising outside agencies. One of the things that we've really done at Cragside that I didn't do earlier on in my career was, anyone who comes in, it's for an objective, whether that's an assembly, whether that's for a performance, whether that's for to work with classes or to work with groups, or for an outside club, an extracurricular club. We work with people and share objectives with them. So when I was science lead, we're very fortunate at Cragside. Some of our parents are doctors and scientists and things, and they came in and it was a case of, well, what would you bring to it? And we shared the national curriculum. What kind of things would you like to work on with the children? And again, all of the feedback from the people who did come in was that was much more reassuring for them. And we ended up with people who originally would only come in and were just saying that I just want to just come into a lesson, maybe do a little bit of a club, and they ended up doing whole school assemblies and things because they got to see what life was like in the classroom. They got to see what we're dealing with and how we do things. Ensures that creative lessons have that purpose and meet long-term goals. That is again, something that you have to bring as a teacher and you have to work on as a teacher. So we have really strong links with different authors. For instance, Ross Montgomery, who writes Christmas Dinner of Souls, he used to be a teacher before he was an author, and he's really fantastic at kind of like slotting into your planning. And again, he actually said, last time he did that, we worked on him with him using his book as a springboard to write a text that finished with a twist. And the feedback from Ross was really fantastic. It was almost a case of having to rein him in and saying, well, no, I just need you to do this for that lesson, because otherwise, where we'll go next week. And that was really, really positive. Again, stuff, there's so many outside agencies that are out there that are creative and brilliant and would love to be able just to start in. I think that really makes it more meaningful for the children, makes it more meaningful for us, and allows us to bring them in. And then that last one is allowing staff and children to make mistakes. And this is something I feel very strongly in terms of we all learn much more from things that have gone wrong. I know certainly I've learned more from things that I've messed up in the past than from things that have gone swimmingly. So, for instance, I do have an English and science kind of slant just because of the two subjects that I've led in recently. But, a science experiment that doesn't work can be as much of a teaching tool as one that does. And I appreciate, as the adult in the room and as someone who, you want to get things right, that is really, really scary. And the first time that I did a science experiment that went wrong and I tried to go with it, I don't know how successful I was. It took a little bit of time and bringing that in. Again, with art, when you're using resources, when you're using textiles, when you're doing drawings and things, so many children, I'm in year 6 and so many children already have that preconceived notion that they're not a good artist. And, it's trying to expose children to so much of different experiences and different ranges of things that, just because you might not like doing a drawing of a fossil, that doesn't mean you're not an artist, and trying to expose children to as much as they can on that regard. So yeah, I think those would be my tips. Make sure that your planning is really clear. Make sure that subject leaders are given time to create, for want of a better word, a vision for their subject and what they want to have in their school. Then work collaboratively with everyone to make sure that that vision is shared, and then that vision can kind of mingle so everyone knows what they're doing together. And make sure your planning is streamlined and it's nice and simple, so you don't spend ages planning something. I think the resourcing is much more important. So for English and maths, sometimes if it's a really clear smartboard or something, we just write C smartboard and where it is, and then that just means staff aren't just writing out everything that they've already just written on a smartboard, and gives them more time to think about the vocabulary that we'll be using in lessons and those, the questions that children might ask. Yeah, I think that's it at the minute. Obviously, as I've said all the way through this, I'd really love this to be something that would carry on and we're collaboratively on. So I will whack my email into the chat, and it would be great if you wanted to do the same to do that. And we'll share the slides and things. And I think we're going to have a question and answer session at the end, which will be really, really useful. I always can never think of anything, and then when I'm driving later on, I'll be like, I wish I'd asked them this. So again, that the email is there to do that. Please do. I might not reply straight away. It might have to be after my children go to bed, but I will reply. So thank you. I hope this has been useful for everyone. A little cheesy, keep changing the world there at the end. This is an amazing job and it's a real privilege to be a teacher. And I think with all those pressures that I mentioned at the start, sometimes that can kind of be forgotten. This afternoon, I'm going to do a quick little bit of spag with my class on prefixes, and then we're going to use clay to make a world tree from Viking mythology. Things like that. Sometimes I can't believe I'm getting paid to do that. It's a real privilege, and we do have a huge impact on the children in our care. So please I hope I've helped in some way. I'll hand back over to Mel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks so much for that. It was great to hear kind of a really honest and realistic account of how to make those things work and getting over some of those obstacles. And I think all of us that have spent any time in a classroom have definitely experienced that, trying to wedge something into a topic that doesn't quite fit. So being given permission to not always do that and fit all those subjects together is really helpful. Does anybody have any questions for Dan while he's here? Or any things that you'd like to pick up on or expand on that perhaps happened in your breakout sessions? No, everyone's looking pretty happy. Okay, great. And like Dan said, if you do have any questions, like later on, kind of as you think things through, or when you go back through the slides or whatever it might be, then his email address there is just in the chat at the moment, so you can email him anytime, day or night, and he'll respond to your queries. And that'd be brilliant. Fab. Lovely. Oh, well, thank you so much. And I think it was really nice to kick off my Tuesday hearing about the work that you're doing and hearing everybody's practical tips. It's just really helpful to share those conversations. So I really appreciate that, and I hope that you've all found that useful this morning. I am just going to pop a quick link. Hopefully, yes, that's the right one. I just put a link in the chat there, which is our Imagine If page on our website. So what will happen after today is we will take this recording and put it up on our YouTube channel, and all the links to the recordings from this session and all the other Imagine If sessions this week will be available there. So if you want to come back and revisit it anytime, you can do. Other resources from sessions will be on there too, and also that is where you can access our booking page. So if you fancy popping along to any of our other sessions this week, then do have a look and see what's still available and what has spaces. You'll find everything that you need on there. Danny is just going to put another link in the chat. So there we go, for our feedback form. So we'd really appreciate if you could spend a couple of minutes filling that in. You will also receive an email with that in too. So if you can just take some time to do that, that really helps us evaluate the conference this year and think about what themes we'd like to take forward for next year, what is helpful to revisit. So that's much appreciated if you can do that. And that's it from us this morning. So thank you very much for attending Imagine If. We'll hopefully see you at some of our other sessions this week. And if not, then at something else we're doing soon. And thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.